5 Live Formula One.
Hello and welcome to the Checkered Flag podcast, the Japanese qualifying edition. My name's Harry Benjamin, alongside me, racing driver Alice Powell and BBC F1 correspondent Andrew Benson. We have just witnessed pole position being secured once again by Max Verstappen. A 1-2 for Red Bull with Sergio Perez close behind. But Alice, it was really Verstappen's for the taking from the very off this weekend, wasn't it?
It was. Back to what we're used to seeing, Max Verstappen on top of the table. Of course, he was pretty successful around this circuit, winning the past 2 Grand Prix, got his second championship of course round here. So he enjoys this circuit, but actually I was quite surprised, and it's probably me sounding quite harsh, to be honest, on Perez, but Perez was right there with him, just over half a tenth off his teammate. And Max, I think there was maybe a little bit more in the tank from Max. He didn't improve in that last sector, stellar first sector, to be honest. A decent middle sector, but maybe he had a little bit of an issue, or the tyres just gave up at the end of the lap there. But a great job from the Red Bull pair, I have to say, because that's essentially what Red Bull want. They want Perez in that number 2 spot, right behind Max Verstappen.
I think, I don't want to get into tyre degradation so early in the pod, but I think what we've seen here is a performance limited by tyres. All the drivers have been talking about how rough the tarmac is, how much the tyres are overheating. I've just been listening to Alex Albon talking about race management in the middle of a qualifying lap. So what that's saying is that you can't push to the limit. You have to manage the car within the limits of the tyres. Now, of course, you have to do that on any tyre, but these Pirellis are particularly sensitive to heat. And if you go over the heat threshold, then you lose grip. So basically, what that's saying is Verstappen's performance has been held back by the tyres.
Okay, well, let's hear what the pole sitter for the Japanese Grand Prix had to say.
Hey, Max, was that one of the most hard-fought pole positions you've had in a while?
Not really. I mean, I think overall we had very good pace. We were just trying to, of course, do the best lap you could. My final lap was maybe not the best out there. I just ran out of front tires basically from the middle of the lap, and then you just can't get the rotation in. But overall, to still be on pole like that, I think was good. Overall, I think the whole weekend already, over one lap we have been very decent, but we did need to work a bit more on the long run pace. We made a few changes after FP3 that hopefully will help for tomorrow.
I guess there is a little bit of an unknown in there tomorrow because no one's really done a proper long run. Do you fear a threat from behind, or are you pretty comfortable in the pace of the car inherently?
I think naturally, just from our side, it wasn't, let's say, perfect. So I do expect people to be close, and the whole weekend already on the long runs, Ferrari has been really, really strong. So we definitely... hopefully we have improved the car compared to what I felt in FP3. Otherwise, it's going to be a bit of a difficult race for us, I think.
Max Verstappen then, with the best view in the house ahead of the Japanese Grand Prix, starts on pole. Sergio Perez alongside him. And Andrew, okay, that the tyre factor might be a reason for Perez being closer, but either way, it's still a positive sign for him to be there, because he could be down in 5th,
He could. He's done his job. That's the bottom line. And there's actually, he should be where he is. There's nearly 3 tenths between Verstappen and Lando Norris in 3rd. That's a gap that Sergio Perez should be aiming to slot into behind Max Verstappen. I don't think you'd expect much more than him normally than that. So he's done what Red Bull expect of him. So that's like the minimum requirement, basically, or it's the requirement, I should say. What was interesting in both their immediate interviews and in the press conference just now was that they were both talking about their race pace and how it hasn't been as good so far this weekend as they would normally expect. Verstappen said the car doesn't feel as good as it has done at some races in the last year or so. Norris in 3rd is kind of a bit dismissive about the idea of challenging them in the race, but Verstappen's been talking about how good the Ferrari race pace has been, and Carlos Sainz is 4th. It's hard to win a race from 4th these days in Formula One because of the tyres. Hate to get boring about that again.
Unless you're Max,
exactly. So I wouldn't hold out too much hope for a challenge from Ferrari, certainly not from Charles Leclerc back in 8th and being a bit perplexed about his lack of performance, even though it was only a 10th to Sainz in the end. But I guess it's an indication that even Red Bull have problems, but of course it's problems within the scope of having the fastest car. So let's not get our hopes up for a close race tomorrow between anyone, frankly. Well, apart from maybe the people behind Verstappen. I think it's quite interesting in the whole Norris, Sainz, Alonso battle there. There's a lot of potential for intrigue there, and that's what Norris is talking about, is like looking behind. That's where his rivals are. Let's
get the tyre stuff out of the way early doors, because and one final point on this, where does this leave us for the race then in terms of strategy? Are we going to be expecting really a management heavy race? Definitely management heavy, but it'll be 2-stop. So I know some people don't like 1-stop races, so everyone who doesn't like a 1-stop should be pleased, I think, tomorrow. Small crumbs. As usual, it'll be on the medium and hard, because the soft is a one lap tyre. But, I haven't gone through the numbers with any strategists yet, so I don't know exactly what you're talking about, stop times or whatever, or stop laps or whatever, but I would expect 2 stops. So that mixes things up a bit. Some people will try and go a bit longer, some people will go a bit shorter. Track position is always really important at Suzuka. It's a magnificent track, as we've been discussing all weekend, but overtaking is not the easiest unless you've got a tyre offset. So people will be looking for that tyre offset if they find themselves out of a position that they feel they could get to.
But we could have some rain. There's a 50% chance of rain for tomorrow during the race, so that could chuck in the cat amongst the pigeons, that could upset some of the field in somewhat and maybe spice it up a little bit. But I think 2-stop, like Andrew said, and where you want to be is starting the front of the field. So you've got that clear track, you can manage your tyres, hard to overtake. Tyre jag is aided if you're following close behind as well. So Max, of course, in prime position.
Well, we'll try and keep the tyre chat now to a minimum for the rest of this quali pod. Let's hear from the man who lines up second for the Japanese Grand Prix, Sergio Perez.
Hey, Checo, nothing in it for pole today. Is it a bit of a case of mixed emotions? Great lap, but just not quite enough for pole today.
Yeah, there's certainly mixed emotions. I didn't have a great opening to the lap. I lost there half a tenth or so. So I think overall, more than the result, it's how pleased I am, to look back a couple of months ago when I was here. I think this place was last year one of the hardest places for us because of what we were doing with the car. High speed, long duration corners, medium speed content. We were just compromising a lot our setup, and now we seem to have found a much solid stability. And I think if we are able to be as quick as we were today in Suzuka, with so many high speed content, medium speed content, it puts me a smile to my face, because then it shows that we can be strong elsewhere.
So how are you feeling about tomorrow? Can you take the fight to Max for that win?
Yeah, I think I'm really confident. The confidence is slowly coming back, and I'm looking forward for tomorrow.
So it's a Red Bull lockout then, the front row for the Japanese Grand Prix. And best of the rest then, as we've already mentioned, Alice, is Lando Norris in the McLaren. Has looked rapid and put the lap in when it counted. It's going to be a really interesting battle, because Sainz and Alonso are nip and tuck behind as well. But Norris has the advantage of being ahead on the grid.
He does, and he likes a good start, does Lando Norris, especially when he's surrounded by Red Bulls. If I remember rightly, last year they nearly had put Max Verstappen in a sandwich heading down into turn 1, but Max really got his elbows out, didn't he? He showed the shoulder to Oscar Piastri, who was squeezed onto the grass ever so slightly. But Lando it's going to be a tough order to jump Max, but I think he's got a chance of jumping Perez. We sometimes see Perez sort of fluff the start. I think the aim for Perez, Red Bull will say, just back Max up. Let's not get congested going into turn 1. However, Perez he's a racing driver. He's not going to want to sit in second. What racing driver wants to sit in second and not attack? So he'll, of course, want to attack going down into turn 1, but Lando, effectively, he knows that his race pace is probably not there compared to Ferraris and certainly the Red Bulls. So he'll just have to try and get a great start and jump ahead of Perez if he can, because, of course, like Andrew's already touched on, it is hard to overtake around here.
Has Verstappen ever had a bad start? Has he ever been jumped off the line? I'm trying to rack my brain now, but there's no big instant that stands out for me.
The British Grand Prix didn't.
Of course, Lando Norris.
Lando got into the lead and the whole place erupted.
The thing is, he's so good at. He just seems to have so much in his locker. He seems to have so much headspace to work in. Even when he gets jumped at the start, he finds a way back past someone within a lap or two. If someone's level with him going to the first corner, he hangs it out, whether it's the inside or the outside, and they're forced to yield somehow. In fact, if I remember rightly, this race last year, he was beaten off the line by, was it Charles Leclerc in second place on the grid then? No, won't have been.
Would it have been?
I'm sure he sat it out. It may have been Norris.
It was
Piastri. It was Piastri. Sorry,
Piastri
and
last
I'm pretty
year.
sure he sat it out around the outside with him and kept the lead. It's just he's operating at such a high level at the moment, Verstappen, that even if he finds some kind of situation where it's all gone slightly wrong, he seems to find a way out of it.
He almost has this sense of inevitability around him, doesn't he?
Yeah.
It may look like, someone's challenging, but in the back of all of our minds, we know he'll get it back.
I mean,
at some
basically,
point.
it takes a mechanic not to screw up the bolts in his brakes to stop him winning. That's what it boils down to.
So, what can Norris do anything from third to try and challenge? If he gets the best start going, immediately gets Perez, can he try something? Does he just need to send it, dive down the inside, even if that leads to contact?
So I think if Norris gets ahead of Perez, he can probably stay there for the first stint.
Okay.
The only question is, can he manage that position for the whole race? When you speak to McLaren about Red Bull and racing Red Bull, they very quickly default to the phrase. I've heard this phrase coming out of Andrea Stelli, the McLaren team principal's mouth, very often. You have to pick your battles. You have to think about what your fights are. And that, I'm afraid, comes back to the tyre situation again. You can't push these tyres too hard. If you do, you'll end up suffering later in the race. So if you're Norris, and say he gets ahead of Perez, for example, on the first lap, his prime concern will be to extend his first stint out to the place where McLaren have predetermined it to be. He doesn't want to, if he starts having to defend against Perez, because the Red Bull's just quicker on race pace, which it usually is, which Norris was saying he thinks it's going to be, then that uses the tyres up, that shortens your first stint, and then that puts you in a pickle for your next two stints as well. So that's what they'll be thinking of.
Okay, well, let's see what Lando Norris thinks himself. This is him talking after qualifying.
Did the car come alive in quali?
Yeah, a little bit. I think I was already feeling pretty reasonable in FP3. Just didn't get the good lap in. I made a couple of mistakes, but the pace was kind of there. But we knew it was going to be tough between us, Mercedes, Aston, Ferrari, so kind of 8 cars, which were pretty close, and we knew that Red Bull had a little bit of an advantage. So, we knew it was going to be tough, but it kind of all came through well. Good Q1, good Q2, and 2 good laps in Q3. So. Better than we were expecting. I probably wasn't expecting a P3 and to be only 2/10 off Red Bull, so I think it's a good thing. So happy with the result.
How are you feeling about tomorrow? I appreciate the Red Bulls are probably a little bit too far away, but you were strong around here last year, weren't you? And you look good all weekend so far.
I think the cooler conditions have probably helped us a little bit more. Especially comparing to last year. It's the first track we've come back to where we had the upgrade last year. So I think it's a good reference for us to kind of understand where we were relative and the changes we've made over the winter. And I think we were about half a second off a pole here last year, and now we're 2/10. So I think on a track like this, it's clear we've taken a good step forward. I think the conditions have helped that at the same time. But also, like if you look to the last few weekends, we were probably a little bit further away than we were hoping for. So I think there's some stuff we can take away from that. Still, the very high speed kind of circuits are our strength, and ones we get excited for, and the slower ones are not. So it's clear for us, and we managed to execute a good qualifying and make the most of it.
That was Lando Norris there speaking after qualifying third ahead of the Japanese Grand Prix, just behind the 2 Red Bulls of Verstappen and Perez. Coming up, we'll chat about the home heroes performance, Yuki Tsunoda, as well as looking at the battle directly behind Norris involving the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz and the Aston Martin of Fernando Alonso. The battle behind Lando Norris in the McLaren sees Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari 4th, Fernando Alonso in 5th as well. The two Spaniards making up those grid spots. What are you expecting, Alice, from those two? Alonso in qualifying at one point was asked could he find another 10th and a half, and he sounded rather sceptical. He did pull it out of the bag though in the end.
He did. He, again, will just need to get a good, clean start off the line. Sainz will want to try and jump Norris because Ferrari's race pace is better than the McLaren. So he's not going to want to get bulked behind Lando. And then, of course, he's going to try and charge down Perez. I think it'll be a tall order for him to beat Max Verstappen, especially for starting from 4th place. And then Fernando, of course, he's just want to try and finish as high as he can. I think his only really real threat from behind, possibly the Mercedes of Hamilton. Leclerc, if he can sort of get it together, he'll be coming charging through. So I expect him to be challenging Alonso as well. And Piastri, yeah, maybe he struggled with his race pace here last year. He hasn't quite still got his head around the Pirelli tyres. If we're going to compare him to Lando, I remember this time last year, or this race last year, Lando was on the radio, wasn't he, saying, I'm faster, guys. And then eventually they did swap them around.
Just a stat for you on Alonso. Highest start P5 for him at Suzuka for exactly 10 years. He's waited a while to get back into the top 5, hasn't he?
It just tells you how bad the cars he's driven for most of his career are, doesn't it? It was really interesting. I'm trying to make this point in qualifying, but we got interrupted by 5 Live, didn't we?
Oh yeah, sorry about that.
So you see this thing with Alonso in qualifying. He'll what looks like overachieving on his first lap, and then he might sort of slip back to a position where he's not quite as high as he was over the course of qualifying. And that's what I was trying to say, because that message from the engineer came after, I think he was 7th or 8th after the first run, wasn't he? And he was saying, I don't know how I'm going to find the 1.5 tenths you're talking about, because I think that was a pretty good lap. He did find the 1.5 tenths in the end, and it put him 5th. And I'm sure he'll be really pleased with that. I've not listened to his audio yet, but I would imagine he'll think he's done a pretty damn good job of qualifying. He improved on every single lap. And the reason I made that point about overachieving, in inverted commas, on the first lap is that I've talked to him about it before. And he says, I think I find the grip limit of the tyres quicker than the others do early in qualifying. And then I don't go with what it seems like I don't go with the track grip. And I don't know why I don't, which is a very self-critical thing for one of the greatest drivers in history to be saying. But that's what he said. Whereas the others move forward with the track grip, and there's 2 ways of looking at it. It's either he's not going with the track grip, or he's finding the limit quicker, and then the others are moving to that limit as the session goes on. I don't know which one it is, but anyway, that phenomenon happens a lot, but it didn't happen today.
So if he is finding the peak of the tyre quicker, then maybe he could be taking a bit too much out of the tyres, and that on that first push when the track isn't at its best. I mean, we're not going to go down into tyre chat. I'm going to stray away from that before I get the eyes from everybody in the room. So we'll stray away from that one. I'll retract.
What I would say, just to finish on the Aston Martin front, actually, I was thinking that was a good qualifying from them. What's interesting this year is that he qualified 4th in Saudi Arabia, but he was back end of the top 10 in Bahrain and Australia. Now, Saudi Arabia and Suzuka, they don't look like they're very similar tracks, and in lots of ways they're not. One's a street circuit, one's an old-style road course, but they are both high-speed circuits with long, high-speed corners. So I think that might be beginning to tell you something about the Aston Martin. And, of course, they had an upgrade this weekend, which Alonso seems to have maximised, and his teammate Lance Stroll very much didn't. Back in, where is he? 16th. He's 8 tenths off Alonso in Q1, and I saw some TV shots of him walking down the pit lane looking very, very fed up with himself in the way that he did when he started to get a bit stroppy at the end of last year.
Yeah, as long as he didn't push or shove anybody.
Yeah, you steer clear of Stroll on those occasions. But, the 2 Spaniards, Carlos Sainz 4th and Fernando Alonso 5th. And actually, a tale of 2 for the Ferrari drivers. Sainz seeming to get on top of this Ferrari here, which they didn't expect to be as much of a challenge to Red Bull as they were in Australia. But Charles Leclerc, Alice, qualifies down in 8th and just didn't seem to have the pace.
No, he's just over 1/10 off his teammate. So when you look at it just without, if you take away the times and you just solely look at the grid, you're thinking, wow, what's happened there with Leclerc? But he came over the radio and said, I just don't get it. I don't get what's happening. And a frustration there. And that can, of course, be when your teammates had appendix surgery, come back, won the race. You had a prime chance of winning the race. You didn't. And now he's faster than you again. So a little bit of frustration creeping in there. But clearly he's not particularly happy. But I think the result looks a lot, worse than it actually is in terms of time-wise. Because like I said, he's just over a tenth off his teammate, and that's cost him effectively four positions.
Yeah, I mean, he'll be fine. He qualified ahead of Sainz in Bahrain, and obviously it's now 2 races in a row that he's been behind Sainz. Again, the margins aren't big, as Alice says. I think his mood is more a reflection of what he expects normality to be, which is him ahead. And he'd had such a good run through. He had a slightly sticky period in the sort of second third of last season, where Sainz was a little bit ahead of him. Remember, he qualified ahead in Monza, and Sainz had a really strong race in Zandvoort, and then he won in Singapore when they were on the front row together. But from Singapore onwards, Leclerc really established his superiority again, and that's the default of Ferrari and has been for 2 or 3 years. That's why he's annoyed. He doesn't he knows he's the quicker guy, basically, so he doesn't understand it when he's not, and so that what he's thinking in those comments to the engineer that we heard on the radio is, what's happening? What is not working out for me at the moment with this car, because I should be the guy ahead, not him.
Well, exactly. Worst Suzuka start as a Ferrari driver for Charles Leclerc from P8. His worst qualifying of the season so far. He starts behind Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes. Now, there has been general optimism coming from Mercedes and Hamilton this season, despite it statistically being the worst start to a season that Hamilton has ever endured. He has outqualified his teammate, though, this time, Russell, down in ninth. Which
is the first time this year. I actually think, although, again, it's a bit like Leclerc, like Alice was saying, the position looks bad. But actually, for Mercedes at Suzuka, that's progress. Yep. He's half a second off pole. Now, that's a long way, obviously. And that puts him in a tightly packed field, 7th. But this is a car which has its biggest weakness in high-speed corners. And Suzuka is all medium and high-speed corners. So it's really not a Mercedes circuit until they get their car sorted out, if they ever get their car sorted out. So to be only half a second off a Red Bull, I think, despite the fact that it's only 7th, it's not a bad position for Mercedes to be. It's relatively encouraging.
No, and I actually kind of expected, surprisingly, more from Mercedes, looking at their pace that they had in free practice 1 and free practice 3. Of course, we didn't really get any running in free practice 2 due to the mixed weather conditions. And they were actually quite quick at the first part in Q1 and okay in Q2. So I think, but they'll still be pleased, 100%, as Andrew said. They're half a second off, but they're a lot closer than what they have been. Certainly Hamilton will be pleased. George, of course, when he's out-qualified by his teammate by about 2.5 tenths, you're not going to be too pleased. But no, I think a positive start for them. They'll just have to try and make progress in the race, but I think that will be difficult. The best thing they can do is kind of stay out of trouble and hope that those in front get into trouble.
I think it's a difficult one to get your head around, because this is the most successful team in Formula One history. 8 Constructors' Championships in a row, 7 Drivers' Championships in a row. Many would argue it should have been 8 on that front too. Let's not go into Abu Dhabi 21. I'm not saying it should have been, just I'm saying many would argue, just before everyone gets upset with me, or the Dutch fans. But I think we have to accept that this is a new reality for Mercedes. They are not the Mercedes of 2014 to 2021 anymore. They are a team that are well-funded, well-run, with 2 very good drivers, but they haven't quite got on top of these rules. They've been left behind by Red Bull, and they're just a very average second-ranked team at the moment. That's where they are. Now, obviously, that's not what they aspire to be, but that's their reality. It's 3 years now that they've been in that situation. So we should expect more from Mercedes, but that's not what they have right now. And until they unlock whatever it is they don't understand about ground effect cars, that's where they're going to be.
Would you then describe them as lost? Will they ever get on top of these regulations now? 2026 is not that far away anymore.
Well, they've certainly fallen a long way from where they were, and I wouldn't say lost. Lost is wrong. There's something they don't understand. So maybe lost is the right word. I don't know. The bottom line basically is that their simulations tell them the car has more performance than it does. It develops more downforce in the wind tunnel than it does on track. So that's what I mean by they don't understand. The way they don't understand something about the way the floor operates when the car's on the track, which Red Bull obviously do. Now, does that mean there's no hope for them? No. McLaren made a massive step in the course of middle of last year. If you remember, they started pretty much at the back last year, and by Austria they were second fastest team. They didn't stay second fastest for the rest of the year because Ferrari improved, but that's a huge leap. It's unusual to see that sort of leap, but Toto Wolff's been saying that a lot. He's been pointing at McLaren, pointing at Aston Martin in their leap from 2022 into 2023, and saying you can make big leaps if you get to understand these regulations. The problem for Mercedes is once those 2026 regulations are published, they'll be wanting to focus everything they can on that. Therefore, there'll be commensurately less effort being put into understanding these rules. So, and all the teams are talking about next year's car just being an evolution of this year's car. So unless they get these answers about high-speed corners and why they're lacking the performance they think that they should have quickly, then yes, you're right. They're going to be locked in a bit like this for the next, until the end of next season.
Okay, well, they'll line up 7th and 9th on the grid, Hamilton ahead of Russell. Is Max Verstappen on pole in front of Perez? Norris, Sainz, Alonso the top 5. Piastri 6th ahead of Hamilton, Leclerc, Russell. And Alice, the Japanese fans getting something to smile about. Yuki Tsunoda gets his RB up into the top 10. And once again, out-qualifies Daniel Ricciardo.
He'll be pretty pleased with that, I think. Obviously, you'll want slightly more for your home Grand Prix. He's yet to score points at his home race, so he'll be looking, of course, to change that tomorrow. And a good start for him, seeing that he's already in the points, starting in 10th place. Again, ahead of his teammate, Ricciardo, slightly closer than he has been. So, very good effort from him. He just needs to try and stay out of trouble. Sometimes he does get dragged into a little bit of trouble, does Yuki Tsunoda, but he'll certainly be looking forward to making a little bit of progress tomorrow. I think he could possibly challenge, if he gets a good start, maybe challenge George Russell just in front of him. But he'll be looking to score points, Harry.
Well, let's hear from Tsunoda about his top 10 in qualifying.
I feel a bit of pressure this time, I won't gonna lie, but still able to go through Q3 and probably wasn't easy. The qualifying itself wasn't easy than expected. Struggled with the balance, I would say, but overall, as a team, we did a fantastic job. Daniel is just right behind me, so I think we can play around with the strategy, whatever, and try to score points.
You've looked super comfortable all weekend, and like you said, pressure. When you needed to get it done, you got it done today. It must give you a load of confidence heading into the race tomorrow.
Tomorrow is a race. I just do whatever we can. I think that we have a good chance to score points because I think Van Aston is I don't know what's happened to him, but he's behind. So we try to score as much as possible. Even that 1 point will still count. And it seems this time compared to Mercedes or whatever, it's a bit far away. But we try to do as much as we can to score points. Even both cars will be perfect.
Yuki Tsunoda then will start from 10th, ahead of teammate Daniel Ricciardo in 11th. And Andrew, we were talking about the gap between the Red Bulls of Perez and Verstappen being a lot closer this time around. You alluding to, that might be a tyre limiting factor. Ricciardo is closer this time around to Tsunoda. Is that, again, something down to the tyres, or do we think Ricciardo has made a bit of a step forward this weekend?
Well, it's hard to be sure, isn't it? You need to let a few more races play out, but it's definitely true that he's been significantly behind Tsunoda so far this season, and he certainly in Australia last time out, and he certainly wasn't this time in qualifying. It's just a few hundredths. He's still upset about being behind and not making it into the top 10, but as he put it himself after qualifying, if we forget the scoreboard, it was a good session. So he needed it. The pressure was beginning to mount on Ricciardo. You could sense it from the way he was talking about things. He used a swear word to describe, when he was talking about whether they should change the chassis or not at the beginning of the weekend in Japan, he was saying, let's at least look at that before we decide if I'm rubbish. And he didn't use the word rubbish. So you don't say that sort of thing as a racing driver if you're not feeling the pressure of underperformance, which is where he was. The point is he needs to hang on to this now. He needs to go to China in 2 weeks' time and perform the same, or even beat Tsunoda. He needs to go to Miami 2 weeks after that and do the same again. Only then will the questions stop being asked. And actually, let's be honest, being equal with Tsunoda is the very minimum expectation of Daniel Ricciardo.
That's the thing. A lot of people expected him to come into this year and absolutely trounce Tsunoda, and the opposite has happened so far. But a slightly improved qualifying then for Ricciardo, who starts 11th. The rest of the grid looks like this. Hulkenberg in the Haas is 12th ahead of Bottas. Albon and Ocon round out the top 15. Stroll was one of the big names knocked out in Q1, and his Aston Martin couldn't quite extract the same amount of speed as his teammate Fernando Alonso. Gasly 17th, Magnussen 18th, Sargent 19th, and Zhou Guanyu 20th and last in the Sauber. Let's see how the race unfolds, shall we? Thanks to Andrew Benson, to Alice Powell. I've been Harry Benjamin, and you can hear the Japanese Grand Prix in full live on BBC Radio 5 Live. We'll be on air from 5:45 in the morning UK time, ahead of lights out from 6 o'clock. It's Max Verstappen who starts on pole position, and his teammate Sergio Perez is right alongside him. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.